I want to thank you for inviting me here for this session today. A little bit about myself. I live in west central Wisconsin between La Crosse and Eau Claire. I've been marketing organic grains for 5 years now for NFOrganics. Prior to that, I operated a large farm about 12 miles south of Eau Claire. We were 4,500 acres total. At one point, I started in '03, transitioning some of the grounds into organics. Over the next 10 years, I got up to 3,300 acres of crop and pasture grounds. We dabbled a little bit in organic beef. The majority of our crop, of course, was hay and forage for the 1,350 cow-calf pairs that we ran on the land. But also, I did sell a little hay, market a little hay on my own. And when it came to corn, I really didn't have the knowledge or the access to the system of where would I get rid of and move anywhere from 10 to 50,000 bushels of organic corn. So it was at that point that I contacted NFO and worked with Tim Ennis through NFOrganics to do that. So there we go. So just I'm going to probably move through this marketing segment, which is about half of my presentation, rather quickly. If you've got a question on a certain slide, throw a hand up. I guess I would like to spend a little more time perhaps on the import side of it, unless there's someone here that's relatively new to organic production and or marketing, I could spend a little more time as we go through. At the end of 2016, there were 24,650 certified farms and processing facilities. Now at the end of 17 of that number, actually about 17,200 were farms. That was about a 15% increase in the number of farms involved in organic production and about a 30% increase in the acreage involved in that production. So it just gives you a little scale there. NFOrganics probably got involved in between 2000 and 2002 with assisting NFO members in marketing their organic grains. So since that time, it's 300% increase in the amount of organic production and sales and that type of thing. It's probably more than that at this point. NFOrganics is also a member of OFARM. And as you see, the 6 other members, Kansas Organic Producers, Wisconsin Organic Marketing Alliance, Midwest Organic Farmers Cooperative, and Buckwheat Growers is up in Minnesota. So their OFARM is a farmer-owned umbrella cooperative over the top, or that includes these organic farmer cooperatives. And why is that significant? Well, everything above that blue line, we have members of any one of these organizations. So about 19 states were assisting farmers in marketing their grains. So we have a conference call every 2 weeks between myself and the marketers from these other organizations. We do not compete, we cooperate. So on that market call, we'll discuss market situations, what you're moving in your area. They may have a contract, but I've got the grain. And so we go together to get the contract done, and we split our fee, what our service fee is for that. So OFARM, I think, is a very important part of what I do. And they also help me keep track of what's going on in the industry and what's going on in the worldwide market, what's going on with imports. So I think it's important that we support that organization because it helps me do my job. All right, in the organic markets, grains or oilseeds are identity preserved. You'll hear this term identity preserved quite often nowadays in the terms of non-GMO. There's a process they're putting together to do that, but we've always been identity preserved as being an organic product. And of course, we hope that we'll always get a premium on that. One of the recent problems with the organic industry is the influx of these huge companies getting involved in organics, be it on providing organic products that you can buy in the store, buying out seed companies, this type of thing. Are they in it because they totally believe in organics? In my opinion, no. They're in it because it's a very growing and profitable industry. It just gives you some of the idea of the big name players and their worth. The head of the Whole Foods Market, Earl Schweitzer, believes it's the up and coming thing, of course, the way that agriculture should go. These are some of his quotes concerning that. But their main concern is a consistent supply. Some of that growth in non-GMO, 400%. Of course, that would include organic. Conventional foods only growing 2.5%. So he's saying it is the future of agriculture. And of course, it's the end user, the end buyer, the young families that are dictating to these companies that they show what is in their product and more of it be organic. But this isn't just something in the U.S. The U.S. is the biggest user of organic products, but even in India, they expect a 25% growth. So it is a worldwide phenomenon. It's a worldwide market. And more, this is influencing what's happening in the U.S. because of this. As I mentioned, a consistent supply. Any of your large users or buyers of organic product want to know day in, day out that they're able to get what they need for their manufactured product. Right now, the organic market is still unique. There's no board of trade, so no futures, although there are people that are pushing that one be established. There's an inconsistent publishing of prices, and I participate in that, and we'll cover that a little more in future slides. But every 2 weeks they put out a report, but there's a lot of products that aren't reported because they don't receive enough data to be able to report a price. And then, of course, finding buyers for you as organic producers. Charlie Johnson, I market all of his grains. So his father was a long-time organic producer. They started, I believe, back in '76. They've continued to do so. Charlie's generation, he's even got a younger brother and a son coming on board. So the farm is supporting 2 or 3 generations. I also market for Carmen Fernholz. Some of you may know Carmen. He's over in western Minnesota. But he has stated that if you do market yourself, it's taking about 15 to 20% of your time on a weekly basis. This is rarely done, at least in my case, without some type of contract with the buyer. And there is a way to, if you are marketing and you're not using a contract for your sales, this organic contracts, it's by flag, 7 rules of contracting, might be something that you might want to check into. And the number 1 rule to always remember is that the contract always favors the person who wrote it. I like to differentiate myself and call myself a marketing agent. And the reason for that is, I'm not just a middleman looking to buy. I don't buy grain. I don't hold grain. I assist in the transport and sale of grain. So I have my producer's best interests in mind. I say I'm employed by NFO, but I work for my farmers. So I don't, if I contract grain, you tell me what you want at the farm for your price. I then go to work and I add my fee and shipping on top of that. So I try my darndest to get at least what you're asking for. More if I can. If I make more, you'll make more. So, and then I add what I need for myself and for shipping on top of that. And that's what goes to the buyer, is that price. So Charlie Johnson likes to say, if a professional athlete or an actor has an agent, why shouldn't he? And I think these are always important things, and perhaps some of them get forgotten. So many people come to me with the grain after it's grown and either about to be harvested or, still standing in the field, or they have it in the bin. I think you need to plan out prior to putting that seed in the ground. It's not like the field of dreams. If you grow it, they will come. You have to know where you're going to go with that. So you should get to know any nearby markets. It's different with organics than conventional grain. You don't have 3 mills within 20 miles of you. We ship North Dakota durum wheat to North Carolina. So a lot of times your markets are much further away. But it is a good thing to know anyone involved in any type of organic buying, be it mills, dairies, egg or poultry operations, anything that you can find within reasonable shipping distance. It's good to have that knowledge. As I said, you should probably also always look at a contract. It does outline their expectations of you, what you should expect of them, and gives you something to fall back on should anything not go right for you. So I am totally involved typically in the contracts for all my growers. I also check the credit worthiness of the buyer, and that'll go as far as doing a Dun & Bradstreet. If they're a large organization, I will ask the buyer for a reference, credit reference, that they can have contact me or I contact them. And the discussion goes something like, we're going to do this amount of business. Do they have the funds sufficient to cover this business? So it's always good to check those things. Logistics, trucking. Some of you may own your own trucks, but many, many organic producers do not. I'll bet of all the people I work with, probably 98% I handle the logistics or getting the truck there for them to fill so we can get that to market where it's been contracted to. So just one of the other services I do for them. And of course, should we have any problems with payment, I make that phone call too. All right, here are some common mistakes. If people maybe are marketing by themselves, or things to think of if you're doing that. Believing that the actual act of marketing doesn't cost anything. If you are self-marketing, build in that cost. If it's 15 to 20% of your time is involved in getting that product sold, that has value. Make sure you include that in the price of your grain. And so also, there can be issues with GMO testing, moving grain across state lines. There's a lot of handling and storage issues in the organic market. And that's why I always encourage my producers, to the best of their ability, to have on-farm storage. You can make sure that grain is conditioned properly. You can hold it until the market is more favorable. You don't have to sell during harvest time when prices are lowest. So it just makes you much more versatile and much more able to get better prices. Not knowing grain specifications, what's your expectation or what criteria does your grain have to meet if you're selling number 2 corn, yellow corn, if you're selling food grade wheat. So those can be found out online. Just type in number 2 yellow corn and it'll give you a pretty general specification. Each buyer may tweak that slightly for their own needs or desires. And I think a very important one is ensuring when you're asked to send a sample to a buyer that you send a representative sample. Just a quick example, I had a fairly new organic producer in central Minnesota call me. I've got hard red spring wheat. We need to move it off the field. Okay, that's challenge number 1. I don't have storage. It's got a little oats in it. I said, okay, go out in the field and harvest what would be representative sample. So I assumed he did that. I told the buyer we might have 1% to 2% oats in it. That wasn't really a big problem. Well, about the time the trucks were rolling in the field, he said, oh, and by the way, Tim, there's buckwheat in it too. Okay, you wonder why this hair is gray. So I had to shift gears, find a cleaner on the way to market, and drop that stuff off and get it cleaned. Now the price was good enough, we could still do that, and he would see it's still a very nice price on his wheat, but these are things you need to let people know so they can plan accordingly. Just some considerations if you should want to hire an agent. Do you have enough volume? What you grew, is there a decent market out there for it? You'd be surprised the number of people I've helped market, then they kind of went away, but anytime the market gets difficult, guess who gets a phone call? And of course, protecting yourself, that's the act of God contract or whatever we might build in. And of course, getting you paid as quickly as possible. Now, most farmer cooperative marketing agents receive something between 5.5% to 6.5% of the gross dollar per bushel amount. So that's what we assist with. And if someone tells you there is no cost involved in marketing your grain, I don't believe I'd have them market for me. And, whoops, we're running low on battery. Are we plugged in? Nate Lewis is with the Organic Trade Association. Of course, there are farmer producers in the OTA, but for the most part, they are on the other side of the equation, manufacturers and such that are involved in the organic trade. So even he says that having an agent typically can be a great assistance in ensuring that you're receiving the best price you can for your organic product. Just some quick history. Back in 2008, there were great prices. 2009 and 10 were very poor years. I had 15,000 bushels of corn in the bin. I advertised all winter. Finally, I put the price at $4. It sold within a week. Had I had a marketer, I probably would have made more and maybe gotten a better price for my product. Of course, 2011 and 12, prices started to swing back. 12 was the drought year, so that helped a lot. Some of the highest prices we have ever seen in organics. That continued on through 2013 and 14. But as of 2015, as a marketer, we began to hear rumblings from buyers. Oh, that's too high. I can buy organic grains less than that. It's clean and it's brought right into me here for under that price. So they weren't telling us how to price our grain. They were putting pressure on us to lower our price of grain. As I mentioned earlier, I think the USDA's report, you can pick that up or go out online and get that every 2 weeks. I think simply by typing in organic grains and feedstuffs. If you don't know where to get it, there's a website there also. As mentioned, though, a lot of times there's no price listed for particular grains. They have to have at least 3 prices to list a price. This is just 5-year average. That would be that top line where corn was. The smaller dotted line is 2016, and where it went in 2017. So it did pick up from March through the end of the year, had a few ups and downs, but basically we are seeing a trend. It's a slight upward movement in corn. Similar for soybeans, but you can see that's a lot more flatlined. 16 and 17 are pretty consistent in price. Just a quick comparison. Conventional corn to organic corn, as we all know, we do receive some pretty good pricing for our product. Similar on soybeans. That's for 11 through 16, so a 5-year average. But what attracted a lot of people to organics is the ability to make a good living, maybe include more than one generation on a lot less acreage, and make a lot more money on the bottom line doing it. So how can you get to know or increase your knowledge of the organic market, the buy side? Some of the conferences, as you well know, generally have a wide variety of vendors there. That's some of the ones that are available, a lot of which I have or do attend. The infrastructure of organics, has kind of stymied it a little bit. Handling facilities, there aren't as many as there is, of course, on the conventional side. Processing capacity is smaller, probably a lot further away. And there really isn't any or very little off-farm storage. There are a few buyers that do have it. They can dry your corn, but the vast majority prefer that product is properly prepped prior to it going into their facility. What does that mean? It means 15% or less moisture on your corn, 13% less on soybeans and most small grains. So there are marketing cooperatives out there, such as Organic Valley, the members of O-Farm, a lot of large elevators or large grain companies that buy, your local feed mills. You may have feedlots or egg-laying facilities around you. These are all ones you should get to know and use if you're going to market yourself. Many producers on the conventional side are facing collapse in their market or stagnation, if you will. And a lot of very large landowners are either currently transitioning in or considering transitioning in. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. What could be bad is that it's done in an orderly manner and process so that we're sure we don't implode in doing so. And of course, it's always a challenge to get consumers more knowledgeable. I think there is way too much confusion out there on all this labeling and branding and that kind of thing. And it should be an ongoing endeavor of anyone involved in organics to continually try and educate the buying public, because that's our customer. 75% of respondents on a global survey said country of origin was the most important thing when they buy an organic product. So this is kind of what I help you do if you do have an agent or an agent helps you with. In our case, more of a national inventory, or at least a large 19-state Midwest inventory, the background checks I mentioned, and handling your logistic needs. And better prices, better contract terms, better market knowledge, I think, and monitoring your contracts once you contract your grain. Any questions on the marketing side? I know I breezed through that fairly quickly, but I wanted to be able to ensure we had additional or sufficient time on the import side. So just kind of a timeline here. 2014, 2015, we started getting these buyers telling us we had to lower our prices because import prices were lower than what we were quoting. 2015 was a big year for Romanian grain. They were the top importer that year. And things started to change from them telling us to lower our prices between 2015 and 2016 to telling us what they were going to pay for our product delivered into a particular point. It switched between 2015 and 2016. Instead of Romania being the top one, Turkey became the top importer of especially corn and soybeans. The ironic part of that is Turkey has very little organic production. They do not export any of it. So where is this grain coming from? John Bobby, Executive Director for O-Farm, was at the Organic Fraud Conference in Odessa, Ukraine, and was fortunate enough to befriend someone who is familiar with what's going on in Turkey. And they have areas, control, or not facilities, but companies. They're called control boards. And it's called a free area. I'm not exactly sure what that free area means. But these control boards are responsible for the certification and the importation of foreign grains into Turkey, which are then in turn shipped throughout the world. Now, I'm not saying everything coming out of there is fraudulent. I'm just saying there's a great, just a much more huge potential that it could be. And we need to be much more vigilant on every level because of that. ETCO was one of these Turkish control boards. The European Union was able to get them decertified. Canada would no longer take grain from them. Unfortunately, the NOP and the USDA tried and went into a one-judge panel unprepared, and ETCO objected, and the judge ruled in their favor. They retained their U.S. certification. So it's a little suspicious that the European Union and Canada said, your grain isn't good enough for us, but we didn't do the same in the U.S. That is final. They appealed, they won. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have to clean up their act. It doesn't mean that there may not be, or there may be sanctions or things that they have to do differently, but they did not lose their right to import grains. Now, there was one or two other ones from Turkey or Dubai area that were decertified. So since 2015, myself, John Bobby at O-Farm, have been pressuring NOP, used to be Miles McAvoy, I think they got an interim director now, to please start looking at this. And for the first year and a half, we were told we have agreements, reciprocity agreements, they're in effect, there is not a problem. It's a trust factor. We have to assume that, they're trustworthy. That didn't sit well with us. We continued to push.
Are these grains being tested for pesticides and GMOs?
One would think so, wouldn't they? Unfortunately, the NOP has no authority at the port. And I forget which, there's so many government agencies within the USDA, but the Port Authority are the ones that control and inspect. They don't care if it's organic or conventional. They're looking for insects, fungus, disease, and they'll fumigate that grain if any of those are there. So I'm sure, I don't know how many times, that there were instances where organic grains got fumigated and still got let out into the industry. They have since been directed by the Office of the Attorney General to work with all the various agencies and get more inspection and testing done at the port. Use the computer system that's in place so that they know when these imports are going to hit the port. The last one we stopped at Bella Vista, Washington, we told NOP it was coming in. So there's a lot that needs to be done to shore up this whole situation. So back to that, the reason for that first bullet point there, Freedom of Information Act. It took us sending a letter to the NOP to find out what happened with this case against ETCO, because it happened in April, and I think we put our Freedom of Information Act letter in September of 16. It wasn't until January of 17 that we could actually get the information and find out what happened in this case. Why did it fail? So even following the steps and the rules, this is a slow process. Of course, Peter Wariski's 3 articles. I think he's done another one since in December in the Washington Post. How many people saw or read them? So he looked at a large dairy, he looked at the egg industry, and he looked at organic grains. He's an investigative reporter. I think he maybe spent, 3 weeks investigating the grain side of this. He found 3 loads that were questionable out of 16 that came in that year. So I think it's out there to be found. You just need somebody looking for it. So we've, like I said, have been involved in this, spearheading this, working with other groups like Food and Water Watch, Cornucopia, enlisting the help of senators and congresspeople on the state and national level. Most of those congressmen and senators have an agricultural representative on their staff. If you don't know them, get to know them and start pushing that we need a lot more scrutiny on this situation. I guess the OTA did put out they're starting a investigatory committee. I guess we feel that kind of Johnny come lately. We've been talking about it for 2.5 years. They came in mid last year. So, we've alerted the USDA and the NOP on shipments that we were able to find. So, how many people have read the Attorney General or the Inspector General's report on the NOP and how they felt they were, or how they've been doing on making sure imported grains are up to the same standard that you're expected to do? Anybody in the room? I do have a copy of it. I'd be happy to share it. Anybody wants copies, run it off. They did address a lot of the areas. I guess the one problem I find with it is there's no immediate action. They've given the NOP until June or July, August of this year to come back or to show that they're taking steps against potential for fraudulent grain. So while I applaud them for doing so, it's not fast enough, I guess, in my opinion. Peter Wariski's latest article in the Post was from December. And he was mentioning how some of the senators and congresspeople have jumped on this bandwagon, potential in the Farm Bill to double the funding on organics and trying to ensure that the integrity of imports is up to par with what you people are asked to do. So hopefully in the final Farm Bill, we'll see additional funding. And in defense of the NOP, they are understaffed, they are underfunded, and I think one inspection person with the NOP is responsible for 2.5 billion bushels of grain. So tremendous workload. But at the same time, there are ways to get help here, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, I hope they start doing a better job at the USDA of tracking volumes of imports. This week or early next, I'm supposed to get a December report, so that will be interesting. We did see a 25% reduction in the amount or volume of Turkish corn, probably was for November or October, and about a 14% reduction in soybeans. So a lot of people, well, what caused that? Well, I can't say exactly. I hope public awareness helped. Better scrutiny on the part of the USDA, the NOP, and certifying agencies. Perhaps public opinion. Hoping so. So there's probably a multitude of factors. You also have to consider, where we are in the import cycle versus growing seasons and such in these foreign countries. So yeah, I don't think you can put your finger on any one thing, but luckily it's gone in the other direction, and hopefully we can continue that trend and rid the fraudulent grain from the system. We can't get by in the U.S. and maintain and grow the industry without imported grains. But we can see a bigger and better use of the U.S. grains that are available. You shouldn't be forced to take a lesser price or be considered, growing inferior grains. You grow the best grains in the world. So I think we need to try and get that turned around. Well, the ones published by mostly the European Union and some of those worldwide watchdog, groups or what have you, it is the area around the Black Sea. I think the European Union is as trustworthy as we are here in the U.S. I mean, let's face it, probably some ability to conduct fraud here in the U.S. too. So. Canada, I think is fine. Central South America, probably okay. You get to China, I wouldn't trust it. India, some people think they do a good job. Some people think they aren't doing a good job. I believe the Indian government certifies the product. The problem I have is here in the U.S., that treaty or that agreement is part of a nuclear non-proliferation treaty. You know what that means? I can't look and see if they're doing their job. You can't look and see. Probably have to be pretty high up on your ability to look at top secret things to be able to check on that program. So, Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, and there's Kazakhstan. There's a whole bunch of those former Soviet, what would you call them, states that are around that Black Sea area that would bring question to my mind. A, they're in areas where there has been political overthrow, or the Russians are in Ukraine. Do they even have boots on the ground? Truly checking that these are in fact living up to our organic standards. I don't know.
Yeah, but don't we need certifiers like OCRE certifying these people for the grain from coming into our country?
For the grain to come in here, importers do not have to currently be certified. I don't need a certification because I use my producer's cert. You could say I'm a grain handler, yes, in that I handle the paperwork, but I don't physically handle it. So I'm in a gray area in terms of should I be certified or shouldn't I? I probably will have to be in the future if they make the importers all be certified. And to my understanding and knowledge, at this point, if you decided I'm going to be a grain importer, all you have to prove is that the person you got it from gave you the proper organic certificates. So it goes back one step, not all the way to the field in the country of the farm that produced it. So, yes. From what I've been able to tell, yes, that these control boards in these free zones of Turkey are the ones responsible to go into these foreign countries for the grains they receive and say, yes, they're following the standards per the European Union, per the NOP.
But now it's coming to question,
Correct. But the United States botched it. They should have gotten it done, and they didn't. So there was another question right here. I think Romania might be, and I could be wrong on this, the European Union is kind of first started by the Eastern European countries, and they've gradually worked their way into, these old Russian states and such. So I think Romania is like a sub-member or something. Even when they were the top importer, I questioned volume versus arable acres. So I went out online. How much of that is pasture? How much of that can truly grow crops? And I couldn't make the math work. Now, I'm not very good at math. I was a C+ student, but just simple things like that could be done. And then start asking questions, how can this be? Where is this coming from? So, any other questions on that before I move on?
Yeah, so what does the price have to be to stop this?
What is,
Coming in, where does the price have to be for us to have these things?
well, we aren't going to stop it with price. This little hiccup here where the volume has gone down, I've seen quite a bit of interest peak by buyers and a slight increase in prices recently. Now, whether this will continue like it used to, January through October, every month the price got bumped. I don't know yet. It kind of depends on how quickly or how much influence we have on keeping those imports at a lower level. So, if you were in Ohio, your corn would probably be worth $9.50 to $9.75 at the farm. But in Iowa, it's probably worth $8.35, maybe $8.50 at the farm, because they always deduct the freight. And they want to get it to the coasts. That's where the majority of it they want to see, at East and West Coast. And they're trying to buy in large volumes, put it on rail, and ship it out. Any other questions? All right. I think just to reinforce what I was saying, what I have here is grain prices by quarter starting back in 2011. So before the drought year and the high prices to end of 17, so December. And you can see that trend line for both grains. But easy way to look at it is a $4 to $6 deduction on all organic grains, be it feed or food, across the board. Well, if you are a corn farmer and you took that deduction, you could expect on 100 acres of corn $30,000 less of your income than you had prior to this import situation. There just shows the corn and soybeans by country. You'll see how far Romania fell off after that 2015 surge. I guess it makes me ask the question, well, how do they keep switching this from country to country? What has changed? Why is it different than the year prior? So are they moving around to keep ahead of the people investigating and inspecting them, or what? I don't know. But it is quite an eye-opener when you start comparing some of these things. That was one of the ships, I think in 2016, came into a port in Indiana on the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence Seaway. I believe it had 450,000 bushels of organic corn on it. I think another question we have to ask, you have to show that you cleaned your equipment, that you cleaned your machinery, that you cleaned your bin. I want to see the paperwork that shows me who cleaned those holes, who cleaned every auger, run, or leg of that thing, and show me the paperwork that says they did. I don't know if that's being done. Then there are some equivalency questions. They always talk about these equivalency agreements. We currently have agreements or arrangements, and that's another thing. I don't understand some of the terminology, I guess. What's the difference between an arrangement, which we have with Canada, the EU, Japan, Korea, and Switzerland, currently negotiating with Mexico and Taiwan, and then we have recognition agreements. So it would be nice to know the difference between those two. I guess I need to look that up. But those are with India, Israel, and New Zealand. What questions does that bring to somebody's mind? Anybody see what I see? Well, okay, if we've got agreements with these countries, how is Turkey getting all this grain into the U.S. without an agreement? Okay, that was my question. I'm glad. So the statement was they are certified directly by the NOP. They don't need this equivalency agreement or recognition agreement. So the NOP is responsible for checking on that and making sure they're following the rules. So is the NOP sending anyone to Turkey to these areas, these free areas, to do that? Don't know. Okay. So anyway, I'm not positive, but I think the last I heard, we may still have a grain embargo against Russia. And then, of course, what are the damages? John Bowlby did this, and he took the reported organic sales from, I think, a dozen states, kind of your grain belt states, you know, Nebraska and Kansas and Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Iowa and Minnesota. And for those 2 years, taking only those 12 states, those were the losses, conservative losses he came up with to American farmers. Now, that was only for 12 or 13, 14 states. Last I counted, we had 48 in the lower part here. So potential is it's much larger than that. His conservative guesstimate, perhaps $250 million. We don't know. There's no super easy way to track that. Additional questions? Yes? No, I market anything. If you're a member of my cooperative, NFOrganics, I'll attempt to help you to market anything you grow. Okay, at current pricing? Yeah. I think I mentioned corn, depending on where you are, how much freight you got. Feed corn, $8.50 to $9.50 range. Food grade corn, most of the quotes I get are $10. Feed soybeans, somewhere between, I would say, probably $16.50 and $18 to you at the farm. Food grade, 20 to 22. Wheat depends on the variety. Hard red spring is typically bringing the best. For food, upwards to $15 to the farmer at the farm for food grade hard red spring wheat. Of course, they're all not dependent on variety, looking for 13% protein or better. So, you know, those are those criteria I mentioned that you have to meet and have to be at to get into those markets. And then on the feed side, where they really hit it hard. They cut it almost right in half. I've been getting about 7 1/4 for my producers for feed. Food grade barley is difficult to find a big food market. A little bit for pearling it, for making barley soup. There are some markets if you raise, it depends upon 2-row or 6-row. Can you get into a malting market? Always a little bit of market back to the seed companies, and then of course the feed market. And on the feed side, seed side, probably 8.5 or 9. For feed, $6.85 to $7 range for barley right now. The oats market, a lot of people raise oats. Of course, I don't know if all of you know what the food grade side requires. It's a nice, big, plump, white variety, 37-pound test weight, can't be stained. Of course, none of these grains can have any toxins, aflatoxins, vomitoxins if they're going to food. So, unfortunately, in the U.S., there's pretty much one food grade buyer. So there isn't a lot of competition. So I think right now, food grade oats, somewhere between 5 and 5 1/4 to you at the farm would be pretty typical. The feed side, that market has really been hurt because of the low corn prices. Back when corn was $12, I could take oats, barley, and rye back into these dairies and get my farmer producers as much as they were getting selling it for food without the scrutiny and the potential for rejected loads. But because of low corn prices, they're staying with corn. They don't switch back to a small grain. So that has really restricted what you're able to sell. Jeff? Those are very difficult, and there's also a lot of question typically on transitional. And while the industry has talked a lot about transitional grains or even non-GMO grains, there's far more production than there is the ability to sell those grains. When prices were better, I did a better job, or there seemed to be more ability to do a good job of here's your non-GMO price, here's your organic price, of getting that transitional grain priced in between those. So a better premium than non-GMO. Your odd or different commodities, pulses are always good, but not all of us live in an area where we can raise lentils and cowpeas and chickpeas, or maybe even peas themselves, but they're always strong. Your wheats typically stay pretty strong, and of course, corn and soybeans. But to answer your question, Father Mark calls me from central Minnesota, and he says, Tim, I've got some red Fife wheat. Well, I didn't want to admit my ignorance, so I said, tell me about your red Fife wheat, Father. He said, well, I bought the seed from a guy, and he told me that if I cleaned it up, I could get $40 a bushel for it. I said, whoa, that would have been a great price, I said. I don't know that I can get you $40 a bushel, Father, but let me do some calling around and I'll see what I can do. Well, the first thing I did is went on the internet to find out what is red Fife wheat. It's an ancient wheat. And there's a lot of interest in einkorn and emmer and red Fife and turkey red, but there isn't a lot of market with your volume buyers. I don't say don't grow it. I'm saying control the number of acres you put into it and have in mind, is there a CSA? Is there a garden club? Is there someone who would better use this product than your general organic buyer? And can I move some to them? Because I have yet to find a large volume buyer want any ancient grains. Well, to end the story, I went back to Father Mark after he told me what he had. I said, give me your bottom line. What do you need to come out whole and make some profit? And I think he said $25. So I went to work. I got him $26.50. Everybody was happy. So this year, of course, he came to me with a new exotic European rye variety. You guys have probably heard about it. I said, Father Mark, I've got rye coming out my you-know-what. I can't find a market for it. And I said, I would strongly consider minimizing the number of acres I put into this type of rye. I'm not saying it's not good, but if the market remains as flooded as it is, we're going to have trouble come next late summer. I said, but I tell you what, I got a marketing plan. I said, you go to the bishop and have him call all the bishops and cardinals in the U.S. and then get a meeting with the Pope. And for communion, we serve, instead of wine, organic rye whiskey. I said, we can sell rye like you wouldn't believe. I haven't heard about the meeting yet, but. Any other questions? Yes. It's always hard to forecast and predict, and you always kind of have to look back to project forward. Barring anything major, drought, the NOP stopping more of these imports or what have you, I see them staying pretty steady. That I don't think we're going to see any huge increases in the near future. That said, typically the next question is, what about forward contracts? And I do encourage that you try and use forward contracts for 15, 20% of your grains if you can. But the problem is, all these buying companies have stepped back from what they were 2 or 3 years ago. They don't want to commit as many acres, as many bushels on contract as they used to. Oftentimes, they have way more farmers, guys like me, coming to them asking about contracts, and they're full. So I'm not saying give up and don't try. I'm just saying it's much more challenging. And I see it staying pretty kind of static with maybe a slight increase as we go on toward September here. Yes, sir. Well, I think when you look at import-export of organic product, I don't know that that will be that affected because, we've got Mexico and we've got certain South American countries that, and the sad part is there's far more imports coming in than there is, exports being sent out on the U.S. We've got a trade deficit of 1.2 billion or something like that. Also, that if you look at the list that shows what are the top 10 products being exported, imported, only soybeans and corn make that top 10 list. I think soybeans are number 2 or 3 and corn is 8 or 9. It's a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables, coffee, things like that. So I'm not sure if we'll see a huge effect. There could be. It's potentially possible. But I think with the U.S. being the largest importer and user of all these organic products, it would probably be a lot less than a conventional grower. There was another question over here. Anyone?